So I just wove some supplemental, and once I wove it, I was like, this is not big enough, so I want to make it bigger. So I'm starting over, so I just wove 2 passes of the base cloth without the supplemental to give myself space to make the bigger E. All right, so I wove those 2 passes and I just rolled up my backstrap. So, okay, so I'm now pushing down for the back shed. And so I'm starting the letter now. So I realized that these first 2 lines were too short and I want the E to be much bigger. So instead of weaving it with an 8 thread float, I'm going to use a 16 thread float. And I have 24 across. So I'll have 4 on either side that I leave as the negative space. But I also need to pick up 1 in the center for to make sure the float's not too long and it can tack it down. Okay, so here is something to see. I have my supplemental that I'm weaving that I wove down below, and it's coming up the side, but I have my base cloth. The yarn is going and just catching it on the side, so it holds it up to the side. So instead of having this long float like I have down here, I have this supplemental. You can wrap your thread around it and just catch it when you weave it in to have less of a float on the side. So that's not something you have to do, but it's nice to do. So I've just caught that side here. And now I'm picking up 4 threads on the side of either side, and then the E is going all the way across. So you can see how long this float is right here. It's way too long, so I need to make sure in the center I'm picking up a thread, or maybe I have 16 across. So I'm actually going to do, after every 5, I'm picking up 1 thread. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'll pick up a thread for the 6th thread. I'm picking up a thread. And then the other one I just am going over 4. So I have 2 threads in the center that's going to tack down that the float. So I'm inserting my ruler through there now, tilting it up, and you all can see on your side that I'm trying to juggle between the camera and the tripod and weaving. All right, so I just did the bee shed. So I pushed down to have that bee shed, I wove it, and I kept that bee shed open when I picked up these threads, and then I wove the supplemental in. So after the bee shed is open, and you pick up the threads, I switch the skewer or the knitting needle to the ruler to hold it open to weave that supplemental in. So now what I'm going to do on the second one, so I lift the A shed and I weave it, and then after I weave the A shed with the base cloth, I'll pick up the threads and weave the supplemental in. Because I have these 2 warp threads right here holding down this long float for the bottom of the E, I want to stagger them. So I'm just going to have 3 floats in the center of those so that everything is nice and balanced. If you think about like laying bricks, you have a 1 brick next to the other one, and on top it's off-centered. So you want to think about laying bricks when you're weaving your supplemental. Does that make sense? Okay, so now I'm picking up shed A, which is the heddles. So I lift those up, putting my ruler in, and I'm just going to make sure to beat everything down. I flip this up to lift shed A open. So now I'm going to weave the base cloth in. So I weave the base cloth in, which is just my white thread, and I just have a single thread for the white. And now I need to weave my next supplemental thread. So I keep this shed open, and I have a skewer that I'm using to pick up. So I'm picking up the 4 on the side, and I'm going over, right here I'm going over 2, picking up 1, and I'm just eyeballing it right now to pick up the threads in the center of where they were picked up last time for the supplemental. So if you can see right here, I have 4 threads on either side picked up, and then I have 3 threads in the center that are centered where the other threads were that picked up to hold down that long float of the supplemental letter. So I have my ruler in, so I'm switching my skewer to my ruler just so I can open a shed, and then I weave with my supplemental. All right, so now I go to shed B, where I'm pushing down the back of the warp, clear the shed, put my ruler in, and I want to weave the base cloth with the white yarn. So I have the white yarn in the base cloth. Beating that down. So now I want to weave the column, or the left side of the E. So I pick up these threads, and I have, I'm going to go over 4 threads. So right where the end of my E ended, I want to make sure to go over the threads here. So if you can see where I picked up, I have all of this negative space right here, and then just the column of the E, and then more negative space. And I'm using the graph paper that I drew out as a guide, so I can see that I need to do 2 passes of the base, and then I'm 3 passes of the column, of the E, which means the left side, that long side here. All right, so I have to keep building up. So every time, just like supplemental, every time I weave, I pick up the opposite shed. So I picked up the heddles, which is shed A, tilt it open, and I need to weave with the base cloth first. So the base is woven. Now I lift the shed open. And now again, this column of the E, I'm just going over 4 threads. So I have the negative space, I'm going over 4 threads, and then negative space on the other side. And I'm just using this guide here of where I wove before to line everything up. All right, so on my graph paper, I should be going one more line of the side column of the E, which would be right here, this side of the E. I should have one more weft pass, but what I'm looking at with my weaving is it's very stretched out already lengthwise, so I'm going to skip one of those. And this is just adjusting to the weaving because this is a warp face weaving, so it's not a perfect square. So now I'm weaving the shed B where I'm pushing down to get my shed open. It's fighting me a little bit. There we go. So I have shed B open. So now I'm weaving the part of the E that goes in slightly. So it's a little bit shorter than the longer one, so I pick up less, but I'm going to go ahead and have a couple warp threads that cover that float. So again, I weave the base cloth first. And now I'll pick up the center of the E. I'm putting that ruler in. And what would really help, so I've doubled my yarn for the supplemental, but if I had something even thicker, it would help this E come out to be even clearer, the letter, because it would take up that negative space around it. All right, I'm lifting up shed A with the heddles. All right, so I have the base of the E, the side of the bottom, and then the center of the E. Now I'm working on the side towards the top of the E. So the left column, I'm continuing. So again, the base cloth. Gets woven. And now I'm picking up just that side column, and I'm following the guide of where I wove last time, what I picked up last time. So I can just take my finger and follow it along to make sure that I have that. So I have 4 more steps until this is completed. So now the next shed, I'm lifting up shed A where the heddles are. And you really want to keep beating this in so that the letters don't get too stretched out. All right, so shed B, I dropped my pickup stick. So I'm just using my finger to pick up the areas I need to. And then I'll switch with the ruler. So that's an option. If you drop your stick that you're using to pick up, you can just use your finger to pick up the threads. All right, shed A. So this is the last step to my E that I'm weaving. All right, so I have the letter E woven. I'm going to weave 2 more passes of the plain cloth just to help center that so that you can see it easier. And then I'll take the backstrap off so I can hold it up to the camera to show you more. So before I start weaving that plain cloth, every time I go from left to right, I want to make sure that I'm using this thread in the plain cloth to pick up that supplemental yarn so that it gets tacked onto the side. So to do that, I just have to make sure that they're crossed before I weave it. So I can tell that that thread is crossed around that supplemental, so it picks it up onto the side. So every time I weave from left to right where that supplemental thread is, and I'll do it one more time just to show you. And for me, sometimes if the threads stick together when I'm pushing down, I just start pulling them out a little bit, which is super helpful. So I'm really making sure to beat that weft down because it's warp faced and it'll start really stretching out if I don't beat it down enough. So here, before I weave the next pass of the base cloth, I'm just going around that supplemental cloth thread so that it gets woven up the side. It just basically gets stitched up the side so I don't have a long float. And then I'll beat that down. So there is an E. And I'm going to take this off so I can show the zoom camera. So a few things before I take it off. You can see that the supplemental threads are picked up by a warp every now and then when I have a really long float, and that just helps. It's like laying bricks where they're staggered to create that density. And then right here at the bottom, you can see there's a little bit of space between the side row of the E and the bottom. That's just because I didn't beat down hard enough. So you really want to make sure that you're beating down really hard between each stitch or each woven line.